Good morning. I'm Bob Irwin, your host for this episode of Fired Up. We're going to be discussing firearms laws, firearms issues, self-defense, firearms politics. On the panel I've got this morning, we have Lenny Davis, retired from Customs and ICE, I guess, yes, for the short time. My regular attorney, Michael Giles. Have Michael Potter here, another attorney here in Las Vegas and a CCW instructor. And Tony D., a CCW instructor here at the gun store, very knowledgeable guy on these issues. And we're going to talk about some cases that come up and how people react to them. There was a case very recently which made a lot of stuff in the national news, where two youngsters, age I believe 24 and 19 or something, decided for no apparent reason to shoot up a private parade in New Orleans. Apparently they have parades all the time on the side streets to celebrate about anything they do in Louisiana. And these two guys came out and just started randomly shooting at the crowd. No particular motive. It wasn't a robbery. It wasn't opposing gangbangers. It was just shooting people. And it's such a startling event that somebody would do this. What I wanted to look at with the panel is, if you are a CCW holder, and I'll put you in the position of being a CCW instructor or trainer to a citizen carrying there, what do you do? What do you tell your clients when something like this happens, Tony?
This particular situation, especially with the crowd of people that were around the shooter, it's a no-win. I mean, if you shot back, God forbid you hit an innocent bystander, your liability issues are going to be astronomical. I mean, protecting your own life, of course, is one thing, but in this particular case, boy, I tell you, cover. I mean, just get away. But to shoot back in a situation like this is very hazardous. I wouldn't advise it at all.
So your advice would be, if you could talk in your guy's ear right then, is
if you can get cover, from here. And if you can, obviously maybe draw your weapon, find if you can get a clear shot at the guy after everybody is down, after the first initial shots go up, and if you feel with your capability and your knowledge and your ability, and your personal ability, if you can take a shot at that point, maybe it would be feasible, maybe.
Michael Potter?
At the same time, you're going to have people screaming and running, and there's going to be a lot of chaos going on. You're going to have the adrenaline dump happening. All of those things contribute, as you said, to a chaotic situation where it may not be possible to get a clear identification of who the shooter is because everybody's moving. And secondly, if you do get an indication of who the shooter is, there's a chance you might get shot as well as being identified as a possible perpetrator. So I think that misidentification could be a real danger.
Yeah, if there's an undercover off-duty police officer and he sees a person with a gun that's not identified as a police officer or security, again, you're putting yourself in danger also.
Yeah,
tough
Or if he draws his gun, he's potentially in danger from you because you'll see him as another threat.
You might see him as a threat.
Also.
Yeah. Right.
So this is, people are being shot, children being hit, and your guys run. Oh. Take care of themselves. And I know there's no legal duty here, Michael, for these individuals to defend anybody. Right. You don't even have to legally defend yourself, right? If you don't want to shoot, you can get killed. Is there some moral obligation that enters here that would cause that? And I'm not addressing a police officer now, Lenny, but as an individual, you train a lot of people that are not police officers. You comfortable with that?
I'm very comfortable with that, because if I was there with my family, I'm going to, number one, make sure they're either in cover or we can get out of there. Again, in a situation like that, talk about chaos reigning, with people running everywhere, and you probably is, more apt to be injured by being trampled than you really would be by being shot. I'm
Well,
going to try
actually,
to.
in this case, it was 19-1. One guy was trampled and 19 were
Yeah,
shot.
so bad odds for him. But I'd be more concerned about that. A lot of times when people, when they get scared and things happen in large gatherings, people react very violently and just run off and don't think, and they run over people and trample people, and a lot of people are killed that way. If situationally, as a former federal agent, I spent a lot of time undercover. I spent a lot of time being the guy that saw stuff and couldn't, because I was undercover, not necessarily be able to take action with that, knowing also full well that I wasn't exactly always looking like a upstanding citizen doing my undercover work. So if I pulled a gun out, I was probably walking
Fair
probable.
game.
Yeah, I was probably I was like the cartoon with the bear with the target birthmark. This is bad birthmark, Bob. But you have to be very cognizant of that. But obviously in that situation, I'm going to take my family. I'm going to get them somewhere, and at that point, I'm going to get cover and like everybody has said, you don't know who the shooter is. And then that guy approached me and got very close, and you still have to be worried about your backgrounds and everything else. I'm going to defend myself at that point. But am I going to go out in this crowd and go hunting? No, absolutely not. First thing that's going to happen, uniformed police are going to show up, and here's a guy in civilian clothes,
Right.
and he's got a gun. I'm probably a suspect.
That's obviously the danger, the secondary danger, because you're in danger from the shooter. And then when the police start arriving on the scene, there'll be uniformed officers. One would assume a plainclothes officer jumping into this would be taking his life in his hands. So there'll be uniformed guys showing up, and of course you're the guy without the uniform. To me, that's a little bit different scenario than the CCW holder there. But you would not feel, there's a child out there that's in the hit zone to do something, to run out and grab her, or...
I think the motivation of someone who has good morals and good standing is going to try to protect any children that they see out there if they can get them to cover. To try to get out there and get them to cover if possible without endangering yourself. You're going to be in danger if you run out there, but you have to make a moral decision at that point. Are you willing to risk your life to get out for a stranger and get them to cover?
But it's important to remember that as a CCW holder, they don't owe a moral duty to anyone
right.
else.
There's no legal duty.
They wouldn't be protected necessarily by acting in that manner if they then got out there and became engaged that they otherwise normally wouldn't have. And the liability, as Tony said, is just incredible. It's through the roof if you engage them with the firearm because you made a choice to go out. Then you've got an issue.
We're going to break it right here to do a little commercial work to keep our stuff on the air, and we'll get into the moral and legal issue here right after we come back. Don't go away. We are back here on Fired Up. Hope you saw what was just for sale on those commercials, and you run out there right after the show and buy whatever they've got. That keeps us on the air. I'm gonna push this thing a little bit further. I understand what everybody's saying, and I obviously agree that you can't be where you've got no background. You're going to be like the crowd. You're going to be nervous also, or your students are going to be nervous. They're going to shoot poorly under these circumstances, but somebody out there is going to act irrationally and run to try and take the shooter down, try and tackle him. It did happen, I guess, in a couple of instances where they tried to knock him down. When you intervene, Michael, and we're assuming not intervening with gunfire, you have an unarmed person who runs over there and he knocks the guy down and rustles his gun away, whatever, or tries to. He's on reasonable legal ground. He can defend people that are in danger. He's allowed to. I'm saying he's not committing
Absolutely,
a crime.
yes.
So the risk is that at some point, if he injures the perpetrator, he could be held
Certainly,
liable.
he could be sued. The question is whether or not the perpetrator can collect. That becomes a proof issue in court. But certainly, if he runs over, this guy has been firing, There's a lull in the action. He sees the slide lock back to whatever it is, and he runs over and he tackles this guy and causes some major internal trauma. The wrong jury could award a verdict because they would find this individual acted beyond the scope of their right. He wasn't in danger anymore. The guy was out of ammo. You used too much force. Police officers are sued all the time for using too much force. Civilians have the same exact problem without the benefit of immunity or even a partial immunity for their actions. So while I believe it would be a difficult sell in front of a reasonable jury, it certainly could happen. And the real challenge with any civil lawsuit isn't that you'll lose, it's that you have to defend it.
Right.
It's
If you
very
get sued in the
expensive
first
to
place,
defend
then
it, even to win it.
That's expensive.
Right.
And that would seem to be the risk. I mean, I could imagine somebody here, my thought was if somebody is nearby that's on the edge of the parade route, they could jump in their car and drive over this guy, which would certainly be applying lethal force to him.
Yes.
But the danger of hitting bystanders would be less because you can control, the car's not going to go through him, it's going to knock him over. And I'm not advocating that, but it just seems we're at such a moral standard here of not intervening in this thing. It's a crying shame that the laws are that way, that we're afraid to jump in and save people who are being misused. And I personally, I know you guys, and you would be shooting back, you're making this look good for television because you don't want to argue, you don't want to apply to your students that you want to go out and do this. But I can't see any one of you at this table cutting and running.
You'd have to talk to my attorney first.
Well, that's the point. We're all going to act within the bounds of the law, and this is why when you're involved in a shooting at your house, you don't explain everything to the first police officer that walks in the door. But I know that things, you'd have to do something. You would get to cover and see if you could return fire.
And this is a highly unusual case, too. I mean,
yeah,
this is,
this is absolutely bizarre.
bizarre.
I mean, there's
this is the anomaly.
just two guys for no motive whatever, just shooting a bunch of people. I mean, if I made this up, you would say that wouldn't really happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And to see it on television, it was so indiscriminate too. I mean, he wasn't shooting at a specific person; he was just random. It was, and it's like I said, it's an anomaly. It's not the standard. In all my years, 10 of my students that I know of have been involved in shootings with CCWs, and all 10 of them was a one-on-one situation. It was no multiple suspects or anything like that. So, and something like this is just so far out of the realm that, to see it on TV is like, wow, look at this.
Yeah,
But
I
at
can't
the
imagine
same
the
time-
investigators are looking for motive on this thing. It's the first thing you do. And
Yeah. At the same time, in our society, things have changed. I believe that more citizens are willing to get involved. Look at all the airline situations where
absolutely.
passengers have gotten up and subdued somebody who was going nuts on an airplane or trying to set his underwear on fire or what have you.
see, it does work, Mike.
And, yeah.
So this is the man. We're going to have to break for some commercial. We'll be right back. We are back here. Thanks for listening to the commercials. We're probably beating a dead horse here. We were talking on the break that we have seen a change in the way Americans are viewing these events since 9/11, and since we've had now people that are victims in airline hijackings have taken action when they realize that they're likely to die anyway, and their aircraft is going to be used. Some very, very heroic things took place, and that may translate into this type of incident if it happens again. We had some people at the Boston bombing that were throwing, covering other victims with their bodies and so forth.
Right.
That, as I say, I understand that happened a little bit here, that somebody did try and run out and tackle one of these guys. So maybe I'm just disappointed that the moral fiber isn't there that used to be. You stand up and fight the bad guy. And I don't know if it's we're afraid of lawyers or we're afraid of I don't think that many people are afraid of getting hit by the guy. They're afraid of getting involved in the court case afterwards, perhaps. Maybe I'm misreading that.
I don't know, because there have been a number of situations going back over the last 20 years. There was a shooting in a school where, when the shooter stopped to reload, 2 football players went out and took him out of the equation. There have been a couple of these. I think in this particular situation, it was just such a chaotic, we've all seen it on the television. It's such a chaotic scene that the individual who went out and tried probably either had some training or some prior experience that made them feel they could accomplish the task. I think that's really the question there. And whether a CCW holder from a legal standpoint or a moral standpoint would engage, I think that's a dynamic of where are you, have you secured, it might be different. If you have your family with you,
Right.
your
Now
first
it's
concern is
personal.
going to be
Sure.
deal
It's gonna
with
be
the
personal.
threat because it's personal. If you're by yourself, you may not want to get involved from the legal implication, because all of the CCW instructors are very good at hitting on this is something that comes with a very large downside if it's used inappropriately.
Yeah, and when we talked about, if he misbehaves, he injures the perpetrator, I understand that there's a reasonable chance that he will be sued. Right. I could not see the chance of him being convicted, and I'm not speaking as a lawyer. I think any jury in the country would look at this and go, ridiculous. I don't care that he hurt the guy. The guy shot 19 people. It's, be O.J. Simpson all over again, kind of thing.
I think the right answer here, and I'm sure everybody would tell their students this, if your life is in danger and you feel you need to engage them, we will deal with the legal implications later on. That's why there are lawyers. That's why there's a jury system. Just make sure you're doing it as right as you can do it. Even police officers don't get it right all the time.
No, of course not.
And so make sure you have to act before you act, and then act decisively and within your training. And that would be the best advice that could be given to a student. But go in with your eyes open. There's a downside to it.
Because these kinds of events are going to occur again, most likely. Shootings with no real purpose to it. Just the chaos of society, and how a CCW holder is going to act in that situation is going to be a product of their training, their moral fiber, and their courage.
Precisely. I guess it just comes down to that. We're going to break here in a little bit, and I think we got one more segment. We're going to go to a little bit different discussion. We've kind of beat this one to death, but I appreciate your guys' comments. It's when I present to you a basically a no-win situation, those are tough. I mean, they're always going to be tough, and unfortunately, they happen from time to time. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Don't go away. And we are back here on Fired Up. We're going to go to a little bit different story, and this one kind of is dear to my heart. This show got me in a lot of trouble with a previous network, and I want to do this story on this show and explain to everybody what happened. This took place last year in Galveston, Texas. 2 gentlemen were driving around in their pickup truck and decided to create some mayhem, approached a house in the late morning and knocked on the door. Nobody answered, and they were going to do a burglary, and they then kicked the door in. And they came into the place. One was armed with a firearm. Inside the house was a woman in her late 30s, her teenage daughter who was 17, and a 14-year-old boy. They tied the family up, taped them to chairs, ransacked the house, stealing stuff. Then one of the two decided to rape the mother and the teenage daughter, which they proceeded to do. And then the rapist decided it was time to take them and bury them somewhere in the next county so that they would not be able to talk about it. As they dragged the 2 women out to the truck, The non-rapist got into an argument with the rapist saying, well, you know, we really shouldn't kill him because that'll make it a major crime. So, you know, we should just like tie him up and then we'll run away. And the rapist agreed to that. He's talked out of the murder. As they bring the two women back into the house, the 14-year-old had gotten himself free from the chair, had retrieved a .38 revolver, and as they all came in the door, he ran out, pointed the gun at the robbers, or the rapists, and said, get out of here. And they ran to their truck and drove away. They were caught later on, and are now doing 1 billion years. But the point of the story was this 14-year-old is a huge hero, and the station felt that showing a 14-year-old using a firearm for constructive purpose was so bad that we couldn't put it on the air. And this is an absolute true story. There are a little more details to it, obviously, but
So you show a
do we
positive
see
use of a
anything wrong
firearm,
here?
a positive, absolutely positive. Kid's a hero, and because he's 14 years old, it's a negative connotation on the gun.
and he didn't even pull the trigger.
And yet,
He
because
probably
of
would
his
have if they
action-
hadn't run, but he didn't even
Because of
fire
his
a shot.
action, he saved his mom and saved his sister.
Who were about to be murdered. Yeah,
Why that would be controversial is beyond me.
Yeah.
you're a Boy Scout instructor. Could you
sir.
talk about this in the Boy Scouts
Yes.
with that?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just absolutely,
Yeah, I look at it as the typical way that the media deals with a lot of issues when it comes to firearms.
they don't want to show firearms
don't
being
wanna show
used in a reasonable manner. Firearm sports or anything else. I mean, this was just, I mean, the national media did cover this story. That's where I got it. It was in the Galveston papers. You know?
Probably, yeah?
They had the word rape in the story and so forth. When I got the initial draft, and then I went back and got the police reports, and the media did cover it. It didn't get a lot of coverage simply because nobody got shot. But
Luckily, it was in the state of Texas and not, say, in a more liberal area like California, because they probably would have prosecuted the mother for child endangerment, letting a 14-year-old have access to a handgun.
There you go.
There you go.
that was
There you
the
go.
counterpoint
Yeah. Wow.
from the people that we're talking about here, that showing a child using a gun in a positive manner was a huge negative. Folks, I thank you for listening to Fired Up. We're going to be back next week in this same time slot. We hope you will tune in. We hope this was educational for you. You can hit our website, Fired Up with Bob, and leave any comments or questions you may have.